Hello, guten tag, konnichiwa, hola mi amigos. This is Epimetheus. Today we're going to be talking about the Sassanid Empire. Sasanian and Sassanid with one or two S's seem to both be used in historical literature, but Sassanid with one S seems to be the least used. So with no seeming academic consensus on that, it all looks right to me. They are also called the Neo-Persian Empire, in reference to them being a revival of the Achaemenid Persian Empire that Alexander the Great destroyed. The Roman, Eastern Roman, Byzantine, Romano-Byzantine, Greco-Roman Empire, another one that people can't really agree on what to call it, referred to the Sasanians as typically just the Persians. If you're a purist and want to call it what they refer to their own empire as, it would be Iran Shar, which would be the realm of Iran. With all historical semantical discussions, I usually err on the utilitarian side of being able to effectively communicate your point and using whatever word or phraseology you think will get your point across better to whoever you're talking to. Just as with the aforementioned Sasanian, Sassanid, I think they're all equally as good because they get across the point of this was a dynasty that was descended from Sasan, who was the grandfather of Ardashir, who toppled the earlier Parthian Arsacid dynasty and established the empire. Ardashir, his father and grandfather, were all high priests of the Zoroastrian fire temple of Anahid. Anahid or Anahita was a derivative cult relating to Zoroastrianism, but it was a fusion of the ancient Babylonian goddess Ishtar and the Greek Athena, whose worship was introduced by the Seleucid dynasty. And she was somewhat of a militant warrior goddess, which came in handy when you're trying to topple a government and you're the high priest of a warrior goddess cult. Although the identity and practices surrounding this goddess appear to have evolved over time, it was a very ancient faith, with one of the ancient Achaemenid kings even worshipping her. And it seems that later on in the empire there was some disagreement between the Zoroastrian clergy whether this cult was heretical or fit within the framework of the larger Zoroastrian faith. One thing that would be interesting to find out if there's any modern practitioners of her faith. Or has that gone the way of the Greek or Norse gods, where there's no continuality? Or is that even a word, continuality? I don't know. Continual, continuous. In contrast to Zoroastrianism, where there has been a continuous line of adherence to that faith from ancient times till now. And although during the First Achaemenid Persian Empire and Sasanian Empire, it was one of the major world religions, now it's very small, with I think the majority of the adherents to it being in India. So, Sasan, Ardashir's grandfather, although it was said that he was a great hunter, great warrior, he was a high priest, and he didn't rule over anything except probably his temple. His son, Babag, he succeeded his father as high priest. So this is Ardashir's father. And he went and usurped the throne of the city, becoming a minor king in Fars. More semantics, I know. The Greeks called this region of Iran Persis, which we get the name Persian from. And he was the one who began the conquest of this region city by city. He was succeeded by his son Shapur, not to be confused with the later Shanshah's Shapur, but he was head of the family for something like a year. Ardashir then took control of the family and finished conquering the province of Persis, Fars. The Parthian king Artabanus V realized this was a problem, but he had bigger problems on his hand, which was his brother was also calling himself the Parthian Great King, who had seized control over all of Mesopotamia, or Seleucia as I believe they called it then, which was the most populous area of the empire. And kind of like a kung fu movie where there's Bruce Lee surrounded by henchmen and one comes in at a time and he kicks each one in the head. This was more or less Artabanus's reaction to Ardashir, where he sent one henchman in at a time, local governors, to go put him in line, and Ardashir pretty much kicked each one in the head and proceeded to take all their territory. Artabanus then, probably realizing that he probably should have gone and nipped the whole situation in the bud a lot earlier, then went to go face Ardashir and was decisively defeated at the Battle of Hormozgan on April 28th, 224. Before and after the battle, many Parthian noble families, which definitely saw which way the wind was blowing, went and rallied to Ardashir's cause, and helped Ardashir in his conquest of the empire, including Mesopotamia and Balash, Artabanus' brother. On face value, the transition between the Arsacid and Sasanian royal houses ruling the empire was far less cataclysmic than when Alexander had toppled the Achaemenid Persian Empire, or even the transition between Parthian and Seleucid. The preceding century had seen constant Parthian dynastic struggle, and much of the common urbanized population of the empire probably looked at all this as, oh, there's those rich people again, killing each other, seeing who gets to collect all the taxes. Or Targaryen, Baratheon, or Lannister, it's all the same to us over here in Flea Bottom, if you're a Game of Thrones person. The major difference with the House of Sassan was they were native Persians from the homeland of the ancient Achaemenid kings. The House of Sassan reinvigorated the empire in a way the Parthians never could, reviving ancient concepts of a universal empire and past images of power and glory, hearkening back to a time when ancient Persia was the only true superpower on the planet. The Parthians, in contrast, had always been viewed as foreigners, especially by the native Persians. Even though they were an Iranian-speaking people that spoke a form of Pahlavi, they had formerly been Seleucid vassals after the conquest of Alexander, and had moved from the southeast coast of the Caspian Sea onto the Iranian plateau, and eventually took over the entire empire. The public perception of them being foreign kings was probably not helped by their very public identity crisis which they displayed on their coinage. They first depicted themselves as nomads wearing the ubiquitous felt caps of Central Asia. They then displayed themselves as Hellenistic-style monarchs in a very similar fashion to Alexander's successors. And by the end of their empire, they were depicting themselves as Persian-style monarchs. So by that point, I think most people were like, yeah, right, you're some sort of like nomadic Greek type of person, so yep, we don't believe you. The Romans, too, then quickly experienced the difference in this new empire's mindset, as Ardashir then campaigned deep into Roman territory and sacked many cities and towns. The Romans were not prepared for this, as the Parthians had a strategy of defending their borders, and typically didn't want to instigate war with Rome. In my opinion, the Parthian mindset was something like this. Hey, we came from living in these felt tents, being subsistence hunter-gatherer warriors, and now we took over this really cool empire with this huge revenue stream. So A, our goal is not to make the empire bigger, but let's keep it from falling apart, and B, let's go fight over who gets to collect the revenue stream. And I believe this mindset persisted, as the majority of Parthian campaigns were either to maintain the borders, or fight among themselves, or reconquer lost territory that was defecting. In contrast, the House of Sassan ruled with a feverish need to expand not only the empire's borders, but its population. Under Shapur I, who was co-ruler with his father Ardashir for the first 2 years of his reign, massive projects to increase the urbanized population of the empire were undertaken, which would continue for most of the empire's 400-year history. Somewhere between many hundreds and a few thousand cities and towns were built, and a vast network of underground aqueducts and hydraulic systems were built to supply fresh water to these cities and towns. The Sasanians were acutely aware that to maximize the power of an empire, a large productive population was necessary. The Sasanians even built more infrastructure in cities than the population could naturally grow to inhabit. Throughout the empire's history on campaigns to the north, south, east, and west, tens, and in a few cases hundreds of thousands of captive civilians were brought back to inhabit newly built cities. It is very rare to see an empire that is so well organized and self-aware in regards to managing its population growth as a strategic resource. This population growth allowed for the expansion of the empire, economy, and military, making it one of the key reasons for the empire's success, along with the revival of Persian tradition and customs. Also too, the concept of Iran Shar was much more wide and accepting than the concepts of the Achaemenid Persian state, which was very religiously tolerant, but less egalitarian on a more social, political, legal level, which developed a stronger and more distinct culture compared to the earlier Parthians. The Sassanid Persians and the Eastern Roman Byzantines fought for many centuries. This greatly weakened both empires. During the last of these wars, it seemed that the Persians would deal the Romans a final decisive defeat, before the situation was dramatically reversed, and the empire fell victim to the Arab Rashidun Caliphate. The Sassanid Empire has had a long-lasting legacy after its demise. The setting of 1001 Nights is Sassanid Persia, also known as the Arabian Nights, are a collection of folktales compiled during the Islamic Golden Age, where the Sassanid Shah and Shah is told a different story each night that ends in a cliffhanger, by his clever young wife, who did this to avoid being executed, like his former wives. Well, this has been Epimetheus, and I hope you've enjoyed this somewhat unscripted ramble while looking at the notes of my previous video on the Sassanid Empire. which if you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about this very fascinating empire, I would definitely recommend checking that out. Big thanks to my awesome patrons, and don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and all that other super cool stuff.